Hello, I'm Greg Hensley with Stone Edge Surfaces, and today I just want to discuss a little bit with you about crack bridging systems that we use over top of driveways, sidewalks, patios, things of that magnitude to try to ensure, not foolproof, that a crack won't mimic back through the actual overlay that you're planning to put down onto that surface. So there's three things that we know about concrete. It gets very hard, it's gonna crack, and nobody's gonna steal it. And we're trying to address the cracking particular situations that we run into time and time again, where people think that they have to have their entire driveway or patio excavated out and then have another driveway poured at the same price that you could actually pay, and maybe sometimes even cheaper, to have someone come in and actually do an overlay over top of that particular cracked driveway. As long as it's not deteriorated to the point to where it's completely destroyed, a lot of times you can go right over top of that if you do the proper crack bridging systems. And create a really beautiful, aesthetically pleasing texture, coloration, things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to afford maybe if you had to have the expense of ripping out an entire driveway and then repouring an entire driveway and just ending up with, again, just your regular broom finish or control jointed, expansion jointed substrate. So this is what we're trying to do here, is give you an opportunity to fill those areas, to crack bridge those areas, and then be able to go to put a top coat on and feel confident that you'll be able to create an aesthetically pleasing depiction for your customers. There's two kinds of cracks that we're looking for in a particular substrate. One is a dead crack that maybe has been there for 20, 30 years, maybe travels just a few inches or a few feet within the concrete, but has deadened itself and stopped itself from continuing to go on any further. A live crack is something that we see going from side to side, mostly I'm sure it's all the way through, and that's what we want to pay particular attention to. So one sure thing that you want to make sure that you do when you are doing a crack bridge system is you make sure that you get all your live cracks, and then if you have a few dead cracks that maybe you feel need to be addressed, that's fine. But one thing we always do is we always honor all control joints and we honor all expansion joints. Expansion joints that may be next to the structure, or a large separated expansion joint within the actual structure of a driveway or a sidewalk even, with expansion material. We honor that width and everything of that particular material that's in there. So they always have to be re-saw cut, reconfigured with the expansion material in that location. But as far as a control joint, we always honor them. They're there for a reason. It's there to give the concrete a place to crack and alleviate its stress from expansion, contraction, and movement within the earth, especially if it's a new pour. So we want to make sure we always honor and we don't crack bridge those control joints. And if you happen to crack bridge a live crack that transpires across a control joint, you want to make sure that you come back and re-saw cut that control joint after the fact to make sure that you have proper coated control joints throughout your entire substrate. So when you're applying a Stone Edge Surfaces crack bridge system, there's probably two ways by which you're going to do this. One, you're going to expanse it out about a 36-inch total, 18 off center, for if you're going to do a thinner facade depiction over top of it, meaning like a spray texture or a stencil or a takedown of any magnitude, or maybe just a thin hand trowel. You want to expand your crack bridge out at least 36 inches so that it gradually has a little build up to center, feathered out to nothing on both sides, so that therefore you don't see that hump after you apply your final coat of Stone Edge Surfaces material, whether it's a trowel mix or a spray texture. If we're going to be doing a full 1/4 to 3/8 stamp mix, then you can just maybe go 24, 12 off center so that you still won't see that hump, but you don't have to be quite as gradual because your screed rake will help you keep the proper slope entailed for keeping water running off properly, whether it's a patio or a sidewalk or something of that situation. So today we've done about a 24-inch expanse, 12 off center. We've basically just got a little crack here that's crossing over a control joint. After the fact, we would have gone back and honored this control joint by resaw cutting with a diamond saw, making sure that you mark on both sides of your slab, however you see fit, however you need to make sure you know where that control joint is, but make sure that you always honor that. So you're just going to be cutting right back perpendicular right through that control joint across the actual crack bridge, but your crack bridge, because of the way we're formulating it, will have enough meshing system and mix to transpire from both sides, and that's what we consider like a cantilever, okay? There's a lot of ways to crack bridge concrete, and probably the best is too expensive, and that is saw cutting right down into the actual concrete and driving staples down into it. But that's a highly expensive, mostly commercial application, so therefore there's a lot of guys that will chase that crack bridge out and use a sand mix, epoxy mix, something like that to be able to crack bridge them two together. And as I like those, I like the cantilever as well, because what that cantilever does is it kind of not only fills the crack after you've chamfered it and done your V-cut, it also kind of holds together from so far on both sides of that crack the actual concrete from having any further movement all the way through to your top coat of your stone edge surfaces stamp mix that you might be stamping, or again, your trowel mix that you may be troweling or spray. So when we're addressing our crack bridging of our live cracks, one thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you have all your loose granular material that may be in that crack evacuated out, whether it's through pressure washing, maybe a small ball peen hammer, something of that magnitude, and then come back and maybe chamfer it, give it a V-cut, something of that sort. So that then you can fill it back with a little primer 110 or primer 100 and our stamp mix, just to fill in that area prior to putting your crack bridge down, or even if you don't have the availability of that at that time, you can use our primer 100 or primer 110 even within a sand mix just to kind of fill that lower area in before you begin the crack bridge system with our primer 110 or primer 100 and our stamp mix configuration. Before we start our crack bridge system today, I want to explain a little bit about our primer 110 and the bonding agent that we're going to be using. Our primer 110 comes in a powder formation, and we're basically going to be using a 1-to-1 water to cement ratio to be able to create our bonding agent to be able to apply down to our surface area, and you can even let it dry, go on as a white film, prior to applying our actual stamp mix in our Spider Lab system for our crack bridge. You will also be using several ounces of the actual dry mix within each bag of stamp mix that you use for your crack bridge system, just to give it a little bit more expansion, contraction, flexural strength, a little bit more mobility, so that it kind of acts like a dim mount. If you understand how a submarine works, everything on a submarine is built as an apparatus that has a dim mount, a rubberized mount. So when a torpedo hits it, everything can shake separately of the actual submarine so that it won't just disintegrate apart. And that's kind of the concept we're looking at here, but by making a little bit more rubberized cement over top of this crack, is so that if there's any movement within the actual underlying crack, maybe we can minimize the possibility of that hairline coming back through by letting the absorption be taking place in the actual crack bridge and not in the surface area of the top coat of stamp mix that we're going to apply upon our substrate. So when we're mixing primer 110 from stone edge surfaces line of materials, we're going to take an equal amount of volume of powder and mix it with an equal amount of volume of water. So therefore I have my water, and I'm using a 2.5 quarts of liquid, adding 2.5 quarts of powder, and then I don't want to just, if I have a very small amount and I want to use a stir stick, that's fine, but I have a little bit of a larger amount that's going to equal, you know, almost a full gallon or more of actual liquid material. So I want to use an actual drill to mix that, to make sure that I thoroughly get all those compounds mixed together, that I get all the qualities that I need to ensure a crystallization and an extreme bond between the Stone Edge style materials and the substrate that I'm laying it upon. So when we've mixed up our Primer 110 dry material with our water, and we've mixed it for about 3 minutes, we want to make sure that we have a watery paint type consistency, not your regular paint. We want it to be a little bit thinner, not like water, but it's going to be in between that and your paint. So if you look down in here, you'll see the consistency is very wet. And as long as you use it within that day, it'll stay dispersed within itself. The next day, if you use it, anytime you have liquid left over and you store it, make sure that the next time that you use it, that you do stir it sufficiently. Hi, I'm Greg Hensley with Stone Edge Surfaces, and now we are going to apply our bonding agent, Primer 110, before our spider lath application, our actual underlayment crack bridge material that we're going to use, and then another sandwich layer of spider lath on top of that, creating our crack bridge system. So I'm going to put the primer down first, let it be drying, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about our crack bridge. So now we're placing our spider lath system over top of the actual Primer 110 that we applied to the surface area. And we've put one piece down linear wise on the crack, about 12 off center. And now we're going to place the other piece down, overlapping about 3 inches over top of the crack, about 12 off center. And I can actually roll primer right on there to make sure that the spider lath has sufficient primer on top of it as well. And then the mix that you put on top of it will hold that down. I'm getting ready to mix up our first batch of mix for after we've already applied our Primer 110 and our meshing system, 12 off center from the linear crack that we have. And what I'm going to be doing is just like we do over a wood substrate, I'm going to be adding 4 ounces of Primer 110 to each bag of mix. I'm doing a 2-bag mix for this. I'll have some left over. And if I was using Primer 100, I would actually use 8 ounces of Primer 100. And the reason I'm only using 4 ounces of this Primer 110 is I'm adding water to my mix, normally, as I would normally do, about 3 quarts of water. Remember, we can do 2.75 to 3.75 for our stamp mix, and the stamp mix is what we use for our crack bridge system. So just remember, when you are mixing Primer 110 and you're doing it within the powder mix, you can use 4 ounces of dry powder or 8 ounces of a post mix because you've added 1-to-1 water to powder ratio. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding my mixes and get them wet and mix them up for approximately 3 minutes. I can add a small amount of polymer firsthand, adding all of the quarts of water that I need for 2 bags of material. And I'll begin to add my first bag. Oh, that. So now I'm getting ready to apply our crack bridging material that we have mixed with our Primer 110 and our Stone Edge Surfaces Stamp Mix Gray and I'm going to put a bead of material down upon the actual spider lab that we've placed over the actual linear footage of the crack that we're trying to crack bridge. As you notice, I have spike shoes on. So therefore, depending on how I'm working with it, I'm not walking in the mix, or I'm not using my bare feet to walk on the primer and smearing it all around if it happens to maybe be a little bit wet at this point. So now, I'm just going to take So now that I have my bead of material down, I want to work it from about a 1/4 inch to a feathered edge on both sides of material so that I can place my top layer of spider lab in for my crack bridging system. So Cody here now, once we've done our expanse of the actual crack bridging material, Cody is going to lay in another layer of spider lab directly on top of what is already there. And then we're going to trowel that right into that up. That corner. And if you'll lay the other side down. Now, say it's a hot day and you're having a little bit of a problem working it all in. I'm not really having a problem right now, but say you are, then you can take a little bit of that water, David, and just mist the surface. There you go. That's plenty. And as you can see how quick that creates a slurry, by which then you can finish covering up your crack bridging system. I'm doing is quickly coming along the edge just to create as much of a feathered edge as I can. I'll go to the other side. Notice right here, maybe I don't have quite as much material as where I came along. That's okay. My main thing is I'm making sure that I have it on top of my primer and the full expanse of the actual crack bridging system. And then once you come back, any balls that may build up on top from troweling, you can just take a scraper, scrape those off real quick, and then put your bonding agent and your top coat to be stamped.